to the Welcome to the Resilient Infrastructure Community of Interest. This is our April meeting, and our exciting topic is leveraging advanced analytics to enhance data center resilience. And you've got Amy and I, we are the government and industry co-chairs, and Sunny's also one of our chairs. And we're really excited about this, but we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. If you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We will, Amy's going to kind of moderate and I'll monitor, several of us will monitor, but that'll be a great place for us to see questions. Anything else? I think, yeah, Nancy, I'll turn it over to you for any other housekeeping and welcoming.
Sure thing. Thanks, everyone. I am Nancy Della Noce. I work full-time at ACT-IAC, and I wanted to highlight these two events that are coming up. On Wednesday, we have a contact center summit. This is the first one of this topic that we are holding. And this is a whole day event at Carosoft office in Reston. This is free for government and a small registration fee for industry. So I encourage you to attend this. And then next week, starting actually this weekend, our second largest conference, the Emerging Tech and Innovation Conference in Cambridge, Maryland. I believe many of our Resilient Infrastructure COI leaders are going to be there. So we hope to see you. Vera is going to be there, I believe, and Sunny and Pete. So please come out and join us. We would love to see you. Registration is still open for both events. Thank you.
Awesome. So we are the Resilient Infrastructure Community of Interest. We have evolved. We've been on a journey. We started as a working group, and then we a couple of years ago, and we've hosted a couple of climate summits, and we are now renamed the Resilient Infrastructure COI. And we're really focused on how technology enables government, business, et cetera, to anticipate, withstand, and adaptively recover from things like extreme weather, disasters, pandemics, and other hazardous events. If you can go to the next slide. We talked a little bit about our overall mission. We're here really to strengthen the expertise of ACT-IAC in partnership with industry and gov. One thing to say here is this is a big area and a big topic. We're not here to solve the problem. There's lots of people working on it. So sometimes we're filling gaps, we're making connections, but we're really here, if you can kind of look over to the right, to look at our objectives. We're here to educate on some of these topics. You're going to get really educated today, to empower the federal and contractor community with some tools. And there's some tools and things that we've worked on over the last couple of years, including a model, and really to support the federal acquisition framework that supports these kinds of areas and topics. And so I don't want to take too much time away, so I'm going to kick it right over to Amy, who's going to be moderating our wonderful panel. Over to you, Amy.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we have an esteemed panel assembled today to talk about this topic. I'm really interested in this discussion, and believe me, you all will be too. Let me just give you an overview of what we're talking about today. As you know, data center operations are facing growing challenges due to disruptions such as power outages, equipment failures, and service interruptions, at the same time that we are increasingly dependent on data centers for every aspect of how we function in the world. So we want to discuss ways to use advanced analytics to provide a way to manage and reduce the risks. We're talking about integrating geospatial, energy, supply chain data, so that organizations can better safeguard both current and future data infrastructure. We're talking about best management practices and approaches to making our data centers more resilient. So let me introduce our panel. I'm going to just go around the horn on the next slide and let each of you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump right into some questions and discussions. We'll start with Sunny.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sunny Wescott. I'm a prior Air Force lead meteorologist. I am the chief meteorologist over here in the Department of Homeland Security in the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. I'm going to be speaking out of my role as Sunny the scientist. So my background is pretty expansive in emergency management, extreme weather outreach, and public safety.
Thank you, Sunny, and welcome to Steve.
Yeah, Steve Ambrose here. Work for Alpha Omega. I'm a federal retiree, retired after 35 years in the government, mostly with NOAA and NASA. As chief scientist, of course, I work with NOAA and NASA and USDA contracts, but anything associated with science within the company I address. I created it's what's called now the Earth Enterprise, which is a large program across the company for bringing the Earth science into the company. So very happy to be here today.
Great, thank you, Steve. And Andy.
Hi, everybody. This is Andy Bochman. I work with the Idaho National Lab, which is one of the places in the world that's trying really hard to create a nuclear renaissance with small modular and micro reactors. And I'd say the jury is still out on whether that happens, and if it does, by when these things start arriving, producing firm base load that doesn't add CO2 or much additional CO2 to the atmosphere. I'm on the risk side of the house, however, and that means cyber issues, physical climate issues, floods, fire, freezes, etc., Sunny's world, and increasingly generative AI issues, trying to ensure that as we start to inject generative AI, which is not nearly a reliable deterministic type of creature, into systems that manage and move energy on grids and elsewhere, that we do so in a way that's extremely safe. So that's my part of this. And data centers obviously are almost the nexus for all of these issues right now.
Great, thank you, Andy. And Joe?
Hi, my name is Joe Foster. I'm the recently departed cloud computing program manager from NASA for the last 8 years. And prior to that, I was a technical program manager at NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency before that. So I'll try to bridge the kind of tech and IT side to the discussion.
Awesome. Great to meet you all. Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to throw the first question, kind of a baseline question, out to Sunny. So Sunny, when planning for record-setting events like extreme heat, flash droughts, torrential rains, and significant hail events, how can data centers adjust where they are locating or safeguard existing buildings?
Yeah, so we have a large issue across the board where we've built a lot of infrastructure where everyone lives, where we're operating out of. The best areas for interconnected exchanges like the roadways, the airports, the ports. So when we're looking at our different cityscapes, we're looking at our different infrastructure, we actually built into problematic areas by nature, areas that were more prone to flooding, areas that were prone to heat waves. So when we're looking at where the climate's going in the future, where is our weather event going to be the most extreme for each different weather hazard? So we have more tornadoes per tornado day on a lot of these events because of the higher heat than normal available in the atmosphere. We have heavier rainfall and shorter bursts of time. All of these different phenomena, more lightning strikes, stronger prevailing winds, both behind and ahead of the storm systems. All of these are stressing and straining the grid. They're stressing and straining the current material composites we've chosen for the buildings. So what we're looking at is a twofold. It's being aware of where you're currently built and what can you do for the current site. So if you need wind, flood, and fire resistant materials, is it just the material or is it the shape of the building? So we've talked a lot about domes in other presentations where domes have a better wind resiliency. They're better for force of wind, force of flood. And then, of course, the fire embers, when there is a wind-driven wildfire, usually blow up and over the dome, depending on the size of the dome in and of itself and the area in which it's operating. So you have the structural change, you have the material change. Painting things white comes with a better temperature variation where you're able to cool down the material with some of the white paint, such as that comes from Purdue. We have things like when we say you can plant trees and people say, well, I don't have the infrastructure. Everything around me is paved. Where am I going to be able to put in a tree? It doesn't have a water system to it. You could do a liquid tree. The algae tanks are also a viable option for a lot of these regions that would provide shading. They would provide cooling for the general area through use of something that pulls out some of the CO that's available in the region being produced by the sites. But also when we're looking at where to build, utilizing historics isn't the worst starting point. So the automated sensor network that's been in place since World War II has a ton of fantastic data that's available open source to everyone through Iowa State University. That's got every weather reading for every hour, sometimes a little bit more frequently. And it'll show you exactly what your area is used to getting and what frequency and what intensity. You can run your AI, utilizing that as a baseline to say, how much worse are these events getting? what is the worst event for each one of these weather categories that this particular zip code, this particular site saw, and then either build into that or pick an area where your material naturally is more viable in that region. So not to say, you know, we can't have data centers, it's that each data center should look different visually as well as structurally from the other data centers in other regions. We shouldn't be able to find the exact same cookie cutter building from San Francisco to the central US to the mid-Atlantic. They should be built into their climate, into the region, so that they're able to last longer and operate in the way in which we need them to.
Okay, so my next question is for Joe. Thank you, Sunny, because she came up with so many good ideas, but when considering center operations, sometimes cost is a factor, operating is a factor. What stands out as a common pitfall that might undermine financial resources available to support these kind of resilience plans and activities?
Sure. I think I could tackle this a couple of different ways. I mean, for NASA in particular, it's probably similar to other federal agencies. Like, we've got a large geographically dispersed footprint, right? And so sometimes when you're looking at the total cost of ownership for these data centers, it's hard to kind of get good data to make decisions, right? Like, you got to scrape facilities data from the budget, find the utility costs. And then when you're picking sites for us, again, being like all geographically across all the United States, you know, network latency comes up quite frequently, right? Like, we've got a lot of places, you know, in the South along the Gulf Coast, right? Houston, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida. And so, you know, if the bulk of our data centers and our HPCs are on the East Coast and West Coast, then, you know, if I'm moving a bunch of data from the South and you're muddying up your network latency, if you're moving petabytes of data. And then on top of that, you know, you have the secondary issue, as Sunny sort of pointed out, with like the utility costs, right? Like, everybody's generally familiar with East Coast and West Coast being the hubs of a lot of the cloud providers. And so there's robust utilities here. I told the story in our prep call that when I was at NGA, I went out to St. Louis, which is the COOP site for the East Coast. And one of the data centers in Arnold, Missouri, just south of St. Louis, was half empty. And they said, you know, when we built this 30 years ago, you know, the power available was different. And on top of that, you know, processors were bigger and the power consumption was less. And over time, technology has shrank and become more power hungry. And we don't have enough power to fill the data center anymore. And so it was literally this giant data center that was half filled with equipment because they didn't have enough power to sustain it. So I think having that long-term approach, right? Because you're not going to build a data center and then expect to be out of it in 5 years. You're going to have it for decades in theory, right? So you're going to want to look at it long-term holistically of not just what you need now, but what you need in the future.
Easier said than done, right?
Well, yeah, especially in today's
And
budget climate.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to Andy, because I know we can take this to another level of granularity probably with him. Tell us, is the current fleet of data centers, tiers 1 and 4 and hyperscalers, designed to operate reliably during extreme heat?
I think I can touch on that in both little riffs off of Sunny and Joe. With Sunny, when she was describing the most beautifully shaped and materials that go into this perfect data center that'll survive the worst conditions. I was thinking maybe you hear about them in the ocean sometimes, but forget that. This one's on land. But to the issue of dependencies, if your data center is beautiful and perfect and survivable, say the LA fire, but everything upon which it depends is not, then it doesn't really matter, because the data center is not a functional island. It needs water, it needs electricity, it needs the electricity to power its cascades and to cool itself. And it needs communications, otherwise it's just talking to itself. So all of those things, and I've had DHS talks about this, and it's a real pain. All of those things need to be well designed and made resilient. Otherwise, there's no point in making the data center be 100% perfect. And to comment from Joe on siting, and the fact that the example you gave, Joe, was it was designed for another time and things have changed and now it's not ready for prime time. There's something in the resilience world called adaptive engineering, we think about it, probably the easiest layperson example is if you're building a flood wall and you're not sure how high it needs to be because every additional inch is more millions of dollars. If you know that you don't know enough yet to know what, in this case, sea level rise is going to bring to your city, say Biscayne Bay in Miami, then adaptive engineering, and again, all my examples are crude layperson examples. It would be like building it with snap-on Legos as opposed to one monolithic piece of material, because you know that in the future you may have to increase it. If you build it intentionally in a modular way, to Joe's use case, knowing that you probably won't be right 10 years from now, let alone further than that, it probably costs a little bit more to do adaptive engineering, but that modularity gets you lots of flexibility, which more than pays for itself down the road as the world changes, which it seems want to do these days.
That's interesting. Can you give us an example of adaptive engineering that's worked in the real world lately? Has anyone seen an example?
Yeah, I don't know if the Biscayne Bay one is an exact example, but it was a topic for discussion among civil engineers and others. And it's both. So I don't have a concrete example up my sleeve, which I wish I did for you, but it's certainly part of building buildings. It's certainly part of many transportation discussions these days in siting new roads, new generation sources, obviously transmission lines running through various places. So it's just the idea of having humility and saying, we don't know. We know what we know up till now. We use models and we project into the future, but man, there's so many other things that can go wrong. Geopolitics, for example. So let's have flexibility be one of our higher values than it otherwise might have been in the past.
Love that. That's part of the definition of resilience. So audience, we can come back to these basic siting and energy use questions, but I want to make sure we have time for another interesting topic as well, which is what kind of best practices can we use to just reduce the load on the data center? So Stephen, we have you here to talk a little bit about, for instance, what about some methods available to modernize code for data center operations?
Yes, well, of course, with the entrance of AI into our world, we've got a few more options to improve code and make it more efficient. You certainly have the manual code adaptation or code changes, and of course, getting rid of things like there's Fortran still in a lot of code that needs to come out of that. There's COBOL and other modernizations that have to occur. But AI has stepped in to do the kind of automated code modernization, and that's such as generative AI. That's one method that doesn't really understand the code. It just makes the changes to the code, and it's kind of a probabilistic type of approach to code modernization. So it's there. People use it a lot. It's growing across the area. But there's one, and of course I have to talk personally for Alpha Omega has created a product that's called deterministic AI that does a better job and faster job, it appears. And we've got a product out there that's available through the TradeWinds marketplace, and it adapts this code with a better understanding. And of course, it has to be trained just like any AI product, but it seems to do it faster, and which means efficiency in there means cheaper compared to some of the statistics where we took some 3 million lines of code and tested it with changing some legacy C++, adapting to that. And for manual code, we estimate it would take about 5 to 10 years to make that transmission of 3 million codes into modernization. With generative, it would probably be 3 to 5 years. And with deterministic, it would be 9 to 18 months. So you're already looking at the cost savings there, the labor savings associated with that for converting this code. So we think that that's a new area in the AI side on the code modernization. And of course, there's other things within systems that this machine-to-machine communications that can improve efficiency of the operations of the data center, and that will sensors that take that data, and they use it a lot in terms of supply chain types of operations of automatically communicating between the machine and the machine. But it also brings more efficiency. It takes the human out of the picture there in terms of running the operation. So it's a little more efficient. But anyway, those things in terms of AI is there. It's here to stay. We hope it's not overtaking our intelligence and our thinking processes, because if you're doing manual code, of course, you're learning a lot in that code translation. But again, we're looking at efficiencies, and of course, we understand today's world in terms of government efficiencies. I'm not going to go into politics associated with it, but certainly we have to be more efficient across the board. And I think between the generative AI and the deterministic AI, we've got a lot of good efficiencies coming our way to convert the code, make it more modernizing, make it more efficient, which will save energy, of course, going into the infrastructure, the data center infrastructure, and improve those processes and kind of scale that down to most, and also determining cybersecurity associated with that. Because once you efficiency and you change your go to code modernization, you're less likely to be impacted by a cybersecurity attack. That's all.
And Joe, I think you might have some comments along those lines as well.
Yeah, I'll put AI aside for a second and talk about a much more novel concept for at least NASA's purposes. So when I started as the first full-time civil servant dedicated to cloud at NASA 7 years ago, ironically enough, our science mission directorate was like one of the first groups to jump forward at me, and basically their proposition was, hey, like, we're entering the era of petabyte scale science, and like the way we did it before just won't scale. We don't have the capacity in our data centers to scale up to handle that. We want to use the cloud, but like we're really worried about costs, right? Like pay as you go and pay for what you use sounds good until you get a gigantic bill at the end of the month, right? And so we wanted to address some of these upcoming missions that are going to be generating huge volumes of data and do it serverless, basically, right? Like, how can we build a serverless infrastructure to do processing, like level 0 and level 1 processing? And so in the past, historically, a lot of NASA flagship missions would work. You know, it would look like a traditional bell curve from like a project management perspective, right? Early on, low money, design. Each mission would have its own snowflake design of both hardware and software on board and on the ground. And then once the mission launched and commissioned, it would get passed off to another group for the O&M, right? And talking about data centers and resiliency, like, most people don't think of ground stations in austere environments all over the world as data centers, but for NASA they are. Like, it's part of our IT footprint. And in the pedestal of each of those data centers, what they had been allowing people to do for the last 20 years is each mission would build their own unique hardware and own unique software and install it at the pedestal of the ground station. And then the O&M for that would go off to another group. And just like any hardware, it needs to get refreshed over time. And so one of 3 of NASA's networks went through a hardware refresh right before I got there, to the tune of, I think, about $2.5 billion. And the larger network, the near Earth network at the time, was like, huge data volumes and even more hardware refresh. We don't want to do it the same way. We're going to move to standardized racks at the ground, and we're going to offload all the computationally intensive work to the cloud because of this petabyte scale science. And so we invented something called Daphne, where we're using like serverless Lambda scripts to do all the level 0 and level 1 processing. There's an upcoming Earth science mission called NISAR, which is going to produce 41 terabytes of data per day. And we're going to do all the processing for that in the cloud for like a couple $100 a day, because we moved to serverless. So we won a bunch of awards for this in the middle of the pandemic when everybody was working from home. We had engineers out in the field at these ground stations installing hardware and then testing it and setting it up. So Daphne is what it's called. It's out there, but we're doing serverless processing now for these big data science missions in the cloud, and it's really revolutionized the way that we're looking at doing science data processing going forward.
Absolutely impressive. So I'm going to open it up for a minute to the panel. If do you have any questions for each other, comments for each other, thing, and anything that you really want to make sure we get into this conversation, and then we're going to get some questions from the audience.
I've got one, which is be interested to see how many folks, panelists or audience members, have heard a term that's been going around the last year or so called the energy gauntlet. And basically, and this is in the United States, although it has versions of it in other geographies, the idea that we are starting to greatly increase the load on the grid after it's been flat for a while. And which, if you're not familiar with the term load, meaning we need to make and move more electricity to where it's needed. But we're doing so on an aging grid that has congested transmission arteries that depends increasingly on renewables, higher percentage of renewable generation, intermittent generation that has significant componentry on the digital sides from China. I'm just listing everything off, right? In the golden age of ransomware and whatever worsening environmental conditions. So there's all these data centers that are hungry for more power because they're both doing the training of the models and then they're handling the inference requests to the models. I can't tell yet whether or not we're adequately accounting for the fact that this thing is poised to get much less reliable, even as we're trying to, win the AI race. It seems like the grid is wobbly right now, and it's probably going to get wobblier before it starts to get returned to some desirable level of stability. The energy gauntlet, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, do we have any solutions for that? What do we need to focus on first to increase the reliability? Is it just about public funds that aren't available? Is it about new technologies that need to be, what are we thinking in terms of best practices for improving the reliability of the?
There's a lot of approaches that we bumped into directly engaging the phenomenon itself. And we found on many different levels, many different approaches that are being shot down by the power. And so until the big players in the field now decide that, hey, they don't have the answers and it's better for them to team, we're gonna keep hitting that wall. We've tried a lot of different things to say, hey, look, just take what we have and use it. and even then there's hesitancy because it wasn't theirs. And so we've got to have an attitude adjustment, I think, most of all. And when that attitude adjustment, which likely will come when I call it the popcorn grid, when the popcorn grid shows up, right? And everybody realizes that it's got them too. And so then I think people will come to the table and start really getting serious about what can be done. I have seen enough on this end to say we have answers in different ways. We have a multitude of answers from different groups and organizations. It's just that those groups are not the power players. And I think that's something to pay close attention to.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. That's interesting. And we have a question in the chat that I think maybe Andy or anyone would be helpful commenting on. Where does nuclear power come into play? And, is that changing? Is the federal attitude towards nuclear power changing, maybe even with this administration? But how are we doing in terms of
Technically, that should be Andy, because Idaho National Lab did the microgrid in a box and the advocation of the nuclear microgrid sector.
You would think, Sonny, you would think. And yet, because I am close to those people, organizationally, if not geographically, I can tell you there seems to be a very strong appetite for these creatures in all their manifestations, from daisy chain small modular reactors to micro reactors that are powering electric semis at gas truck stops, etc. But they're just not going to be ready in the United States yet, and not until the 2030s, and not at scale. They're not going to be in the aisle 6 of Home Depot anytime soon. And we need this energy now. I mean, we need it really fast. And what's most likely going to happen is a significant build out of natural gas and the delayed retirement of coal and natural gas plants, and some old nukes too, to try to make up the difference. Man, if these things were ready now and tested and they'd made it through all of the NRC certs and everything, I think they'd be going like hotcakes, even as they're more expensive per kilowatt hour than wind, solar, and storage. The resilience and the reliability and the base load aspect that they can provide makes them worth it. But they're just not ready yet. And I hate to say that, but people need to deal with reality. So.
And in all fairness, this isn't a solution that is being employed from any other country's purview right now. When we're looking at these issues, the problem sets from weather, the data centers, the energy grid, great example of what's going on in Spain, Madrid, and France, and Germany right now. When we're talking about the grid and the capability to keep up, this isn't, one country's found the answer and the rest of us are lagging behind. This is, we're all trying to build, build the aircraft while you're flying it. And we're running into the same issues, which is the things we're building are not scalable just yet. They require mass infrastructure. If we were to do floating offshore anything at this point, you have to do all these connectivity systems in order to bring that energy into the US, in order to load the grid, in order to move the transmission into these areas at the same time that we're saying batteries are the way of the future for the vehicles. Batteries are going to be the way of the future for backup generation. These aren't employable in the central portions of the US from the coast. The central portions leaning more on wind and solar, and then facing these severe weather events, taking those out, taking out pipelines, looking at offshore platforms in the Gulf for the oil side of the house. Those get hit with hurricanes. The eddies that spin under the water sever the connection to the ocean floor, and they become inoperable during that. We're looking at the issues with, submarine connectivities for the cabling systems. So this is a problem set, not just that the US is facing, it's Europe, China, India, Ireland, all these major data center hubs are running into the same problems where they're shutting down, or they're having latency issues, or they're running into drought concerns because there's not enough water to go around. They're not efficient enough yet. They're not able to cool enough yet. And that's really a big part of the problem set, is looking for, if this is such a continuation of an issue, where can we move in the diversified portfolio realm? I know that everyone wants to jump into the next best thing, nuclear batteries. Like, there must be one solution. But again, in all honesty, the only reason we're in the problem that we're in is because we have such a diversified issue. So saying we need a diversified solution matches the problem set. Saying I want to find the one quick answer is one of those get rich quick scheme kind of concepts, and that's just not employable across the government.
Yeah, and of course, smart grids, of course, are coming of age. We hope the machine-to-machine communication really helps in that, because you can switch over almost automatically from solar to wind to coal to nuclear to the hydro, those and natural gas. So the more the utilities get into the smart grid process there, I think you're going to find a little more resilience in being able to recover from things that can affect your power. And of course, space weather is one big issue that's growing in need. And of course, new instruments are going up to increase the observation of that, and how you build resilient infrastructure to resist those types of solar events that we're running into. But like with Sunny saying, the weather impacts out in California, or not just weather, but wildfire can destroy the power lines. The power lines can start the wildfire, but vice versa, the fires can burn the power lines. So I know that Nevada Energy is out there doing physical mitigation of the ground, removing the fuels underneath that, or the undergrowth under the power lines, so that there's a break between that and the fires. That helps to build resilience into it. And of course, burying your power lines underground can can increase the resilience due to storms knocking the power out. In my own neighborhood, of course, you got some resilience issues that you have people running into power poles and things that can create big power outages. So of course, I supplement my energy with a backup generator, which I think is becoming more popular, but it really comes in handy when you have to have your power, that you have the generation to do that. And data centers can do that. They'll run on diesel for a while. The issues with running on diesel for a while is that the air pollution created from that, so they don't want to do that on a continuous basis. But it's good backup power to keep the operation going and keep your communications going, keep your internet going. All important these days in a world where we depend more and more on the internet. There are not very many antennas on people's roofs anymore. You're all running on streaming services, so it really impacts your life when the infrastructure goes down, the power goes down, and the communications goes down with that. But a lot of things, smart grids, I think, is really a way to do that, as well as protecting it. And of course, Sunny, and you being working for DHS and supporting that, in terms of the terrorism issues you have, or just people shooting, or hunters hunting around power central power areas will often shoot those out, and you don't know what caused that. Just like what's happening, like you say, out in Spain today, the issues associated with an unknown outage on a massive scale that we're experiencing. And that's a lot to be learned from that. The lessons learned from this happening today and happening in the past, the larger scales. How do you recover from those quickly within hurricanes like Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Andrew, which really knocked the power out for many, many weeks. The storms, of course, Helene down in North Carolina. Those types of things really destroy the infrastructure, and building back is really important, how you do that more resilient. So you got to learn from that, and it's going to cost you a little bit more to become more resilient after a disaster because of the building back. And like, as I say, building back better is, of course, the way to go.
And I'd love us to come back together once we get the same group. Let's come back together after we learn more about the European outage and have a discussion on that, because that could be very interesting. So before we start with our final, like, round the horn set of questions, Vera or the rest of the audience, does anyone have a question they want to pop in with? Feel free to come off mute and ask your question.
I was going to say, yes, let's get out of the audience, get some questions.
Well, listen, audience, feel free to pipe in. I know a lot of you have some great expertise as well. Let's just have some simple closing questions, and of course, panelists, you can take it into whatever direction you want to, but I think this one, especially for Joe, what's a smart way that one can use analytics to stay ahead of disruption to data center operations? So resilience planning and anticipating disruptions. Any basic tools that we should know about?
Yeah, I think it goes back to Andy's point earlier about the adaptive engineering, right? Like, I think you can make your best guess at what you need going forward, but having some sort of buffer in there, right? Like, I think the panel has mentioned generative AI at least 3 times thus far, and like no one knew what generative AI was like a couple of years ago. And so like that gives you an idea of just how disruptive technology can be when something new comes along. So I would say you're going to have to make your best guess at adaptive engineering, with also realizing that something disruptive is likely to come in along the way, and being able to adapt as you go. And I think from what I witnessed at NASA, and actually even at NGA prior, is that like getting your data house in order and like being able to like get to the foundational data to make decision makings and to get out of the best guess category is going to be critical. Like getting that kind of plumbing for data to make decisions in place is sometimes, especially in government, the most difficult piece. It's less about the lick your finger and guess what the future is going to hold, and more about like, I can't even make a data-driven decision because the data is just so scarce or hard to get at. And I think if you get that in order, you can do at least some foundations of adaptive engineering to try to like plot the course for where you're going to go in the future.
I was going to say, you don't forget, you have to make the business case for adaptive engineering. It's going to be more. And these projects, there'll be people who'll be like, we can't afford that. Short-termism, right, rules the day. And so you have to be really compelling and do your homework to make the case for the extra amount of money, which I don't know what it is. It varies by project and by the risks you're considering that you haven't foreseen fully yet. But there's the whole money part of things that we're not talking about here, but that really rule everything.
Yeah, that's sort of why I sort of got at the like, get the data foundation to the best possible place that you can get it to, and then at least you have the kind of algorithm in place to where you start pulling on the lever, understand what the needle in which direction. Because yeah, my example about NGA and picking the site they used, of course, it was a money-driven decision, right? And then 20 years later, they couldn't get enough power into the data center. So
Setting decisions are hard. Okay, let's try to end on a positive note. Whoever wants to jump in first, tell me about a project or breakthrough you're working of, or colleagues are working of, or you're deeply aware of, that has the potential to move the needle in terms of data center resilience.
So I'll start in on that. I did a fun little side project utilizing a couple of different AI companies where I was trying to figure out who could get what done. Not My dad's a database administrator. I am not. So the communication side of the house was critical because the goal is to make a product that's usable by emergency managers as well as site owners and operators. So what we did was we collected mass amounts of aggregate data, and then we trained an AI to be able to go through and read through all of the data, read through automated sensor reporting, which is held in METAR code, which is something meteorologists use to communicate weather in single lines. So through that, what we did was we created a sort of chat bot, but it's so much more than that, where you're able to ask it, how many times has my site seen X? And it'll pull up these fantastic graphs for you to be able to utilize to go from that step into the next step, which is what kind of planning do I need to do? It'll go out and it'll pull fact sheets, different distributions that have been sent out either by the federal government or by other international entities. And I think that's such a critical part that we often overlook is what are some of the other countries who are going through the same pain points doing about this, or what have they tried already over the last 20, 30 years that have failed in some capacity or another because they're in the same boat, and what can we learn from that so we're not repeating the same mistakes at cost here. So some of the great examples from that, when I advocate domes, the first thing that I did was I went to other countries and I started pulling data on what kind of domes they were using. How are they making domes more resilient if they were using domes? You can make a solar dome, for example, a massive solar dome, so that you're able to not only have the dome shape, but be able to generate electricity inside. We have concrete domes in places like Alaska and Washington and Tennessee, in Virginia. We also have them in some other countries. Looking at those and then budding them up with things like blackwater recycling systems, looking at, okay, if I was to make a building and I wanted the building to be resilient and I wanted to build it in the right spot. Every state has a climate haven within the state. There is no geological area that is the best area. It is building into the damage that area is expecting to see. So we created this tool so that people would be able to kind of funnel all of that information into one PDF booklet. The goal is to be able to get that in everyone's hands in the next month or so. From that, a bunch of people are going to be testing it out, and we're going to be able to see what it is that they're looking for question-wise. Is this the right site? What damages should I be aware of if I build here? If I'm aware of these damages, what is out there to prevent from these damages? If we're looking at hail, you can do a 3D printed honeycomb sort of membrane that you can put over a roof. And that's a retrofit you can add onto the roof. Instead of saying you got to scrap the building and build a dome, you can dome out a part of the roof utilizing that. And so it'll kind of give them all of those answers in one spot instead of needing to hire on an entire team that spends a year doing a bunch of open source research. They'll be able to start that point next step further forward.
That sounds
One project that I'm really excited about and interested in, I put a link in the chat just now, with all the talk about weather and its impact and more severe weather use cases, and we talked about smart grids a little bit earlier. A lot of people forget that the first A in NASA is aeronautics, and so we're heavy in the enabling autonomous drones over urban environment research. And one of the projects is something called the Data and Reasoning Fabric. I talked before about NASA's large volume of data going forward, but we, by no stretch of the imagination, will hold a monopoly over all data sources everywhere. And so in order to enable autonomous drones over urban environments, you need to have a data exchange to allow for passing of real-time data that you trust, right? So a blockchain component as well. If a drone is going to make a decision about weather, about traffic, about whatever's going on. And so DRF is in its early phases. There's a cool little YouTube video if you want to watch it after this is over that's on the page I put in the chat. But it's having that real-time data exchange from trusted sources that's not all government certified certificates and things like that. It's a very interesting concept that's in sort of the early R&D phases today that, as you can imagine, will have a high impact on society in the next decade to come as it progresses.
In one area that my company's working on, and what I worked on much of my career, was on data stewardship. And with data stewardship, you can bring some efficiencies in accessing the data. And of course, the data that NOAA provides at the National Center for Environmental Information brings all sorts of data together in terms of making decisions about where do you site the data centers, where do you site your power grid, your power generation is really important in understanding that data. So the many years, at least going back more than 50 years of satellite remote sensing and that data put into climatological data sets, as well as the climate observations, really play a key role in that. And getting access to that data, of course, at NCEI and other locations requires that data to have a great description of it, what we call metadata, and how to access that data efficiently and making sure that data is very accurate, because it really comes in handy for the utilities, for the policymakers. Where are you going to put this power generation? Are you going to have enough solar energy? Where is that going to be? Where's the wind going to be blowing more the best that you need, and determining those site locations. And of course, what the environmental factors are in terms of air quality, whether you're burning coal, natural gas, or what other types of pollutants might be generated in the creation of that power. So I think the data stewardship side is very important. We support that at NOAA in Asheville and across the United States, and helping them improve the efficiency of their data and the quality of their data.
Fascinating. Anybody else want to throw in a best practice?
And while you're thinking, also, you can put it in the chat, but we've got a lot of people out here that are interested in listening, so they may not be lucky enough to tackle this in their day job. So if you have a recommendation for them on something they can work on or how to get engaged, that would be awesome. They can also join our community of interest. That's my little commercial for us, because I don't get to tackle this in my day job. So through my passion, I do it through volunteering as part of ACT-IAC.
Yes, and we're going to move over to Jim Sprague in just a minute and let him talk about one project that people can get involved in. But this has been terrific. Thank you, speakers. I've already thought of a couple ideas for future sessions based on this chat, maybe one on low Earth orbit satellite connectivity. We already decided we want to look at what happened in Europe today. And, that could be an interesting conversation coupled with last year, we had some interesting conversations with some folks in the European Union who are working on some of these issues. So I'd love to get one of our European speakers back. And any other ideas you guys have for future webinar sessions would be great. But I hope we can get as an esteemed panel like this back again.
This has been awesome. But yeah, if people have suggestions for actual speakers or topics, even our guest panelist, let us know, because this is part of the educational component of, what our COI does.
Yep. And then with that, I'm going to let Jim take over the conversation for a minute and talk about the, what are we calling it now? It used to be our Clouds and Climate project team, but Jim, we've renamed it. Data center site selection. Take it away, sir.
All right, thank you. So I'm Jim Sprague. I work for the Cadmus Group, and I'm fortunate that I get to use data analytics in my day job, which is awesome. And great panel. This is really fantastic, and I'm excited to talk about this new project, which is the strategic site selection for data centers, which everything we've just talked about falls right into this. I'm going to talk about a project that happened last year, and then I think that'll provide more context for this. Last year, I had a great team, Amy and Nate, put together the data center scorecard, and that was about if you're looking to either select from a set of data centers in the cloud or a provider. How are they using energy? Is it efficient? How are they using water? How do they recycle their e-waste and that sort of thing? And so it was a scorecard that let a person in government and industry make a decision, like this data center looks better than that one. Looks like they've got their act together. So it was a great thing that tied together a lot of the concepts we're talking today. But now we want to add on to that. So we're going to stack on to that and talk about where. So that scorecard did not talk about where to site select for a data center. And so let's think about that. And we've got tons of conversation around that and what we want to do. I think we know the why, right? At the top of this slide, but what we want to do is provide insights, actionable insights that will help the government and others figure out where to put it. Now, this doesn't have to be a new data center. This could be an existing one. And if it's new, it's even more important, put it in the right spot. On top of that, what are all the risks? And we talked about that a lot. So what we want to do is really raise awareness and then put together some sort of risk assessment tool. That could be a checklist. It could be something cool like a map, and you can click around on it. We don't know yet. So come join us, and I'll leave with this. Our call to action here is to we're looking for volunteers, experts in weather, data center engineering, construction, legal. Come join us and figure out what kind of risk assessment tool would be really engaging and compelling for our members and others in government. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Amy. If any questions, let me know. But over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Jim. That project should be fun. We're gonna borrow some of the work that Sunny just articulated in her project, but maybe simplify it, also make it more digestible for the average ACT-IAC member, right? So thank you, Sunny, for being our government advisor for that project. Anybody on the meeting that wants to make a final closing point, ask a question they didn't get a chance to ask? We have 2 or 3 more minutes.
And we